two-part workshop that we entitled Human Factors and Technology Safety in Healthcare Risk Management in the Age of AI. And in the previous workshop, we went through some of the classic basic methods of usability inspection. And today we're going to go past that and look at different ways of interacting with health, of observing and studying interaction with health systems. So, from last week, I just asked if anyone wanted to try out a few things as a bit of a take home. One was, I don't know if anyone tried it out, but to try out some of the usability inspection methods that we mentioned. One was the heuristic evaluation, and the other was the cognitive walkthrough. And if you tried them out, to see which you found most useful and why, and what did the method tell you about the application. And secondly, as a preliminary for this presentation, I gave this basic recording instructions and said, try out using the computer, thinking aloud, and recording yourself in doing so. So I'm interested, has anyone tried out the inspection methods or the recordings? And if you have, just put in the chat box what you found. What type of, if you did the recording, what type of recording did you try and did it work? That's the other question. And if you tried the inspection methods, what seemed to work or not. So hopefully I had a chance to try. The recording that I had to try last week is the basic beta that I'll be talking about today in this presentation. So yeah, if you have experience with that, just put that in the chat box, and I will go through that. So that was from last week, a very informal exercise. So today, I wanted to continue with talking about human factors approaches with health informatics design and evaluation for both usable and useful health care systems. Well, before I start, did anybody get a chance to try the recording? If you did, just unmute yourself and let me know what you tried or what was able to. Simon said he was able to successfully use Zoom to do smartphone screen recordings. And this is very useful. Simon, do you want to mention what you did?
Hi, Andre. Hi, everyone. Yes, there's a couple of ways to do it that I found, but Zoom allows you to show your smartphone screen as the screen you are sharing. And I'm not 100% certain I've got a good audio recording out of it, but I am able to show my smartphone screen as a screen sharing in Zoom, and it does record. So when you record the session and then show your smartphone screen, that's recorded. So I'm just listening to it and looking at it now. I see the recording of it, but I'm not hearing any audio. So something may have gone wrong there. But
yeah,
it's worth a look. I mean, for doing remote work, it's great.
So what Simon we were doing was using the someone was testing an application on the phone and they were in Zoom, and then we were able to see their screen, and you recorded that screen from your desktop.
Yeah, that's right.
And for the audio, what you could do is you could, if they were in the same area, it would pick up the audio, but as you said, that would just record the screen. Another way is having a microphone connected as well. But
yeah, I would just be careful and also record that.
Yeah. So that what you got was some of the data we'll talk about today. So it doesn't matter whether it's a mobile, desktop, or some other application. The ability to record what you're doing and saying at the same time is critical. For what we're going to talk about, which is usability testing involving observation of users, and then we'll move to a topic called clinical simulations and real-life evaluation. So in the methods we talked about, and the blue ones were the ones from last week, the heuristic evaluation, where we had these rules of thumbs or heuristics, and Elizabeth Borycki talked about how they were extended into heuristics for safety. Cognitive walkthrough, we talked about the classic method and or we had also developed a hybrid method that allowed you to do both the walkthrough and the holistic evaluation. Today are the two topics in red. One is usability testing, what I call low-cost rapid usability testing, and clinical simulations. So back to the definition of usability as a measure of ease of use of a system in terms of several dimensions. One is learning. How easy is it to learn how to use a system or not? And if we're focusing on that, we can do things like develop learning curves for different technologies. I heard the method today called learning and forgetting curves as well, how we learn and forget how to use systems. A second dimension is effectiveness. Does the system do what it's supposed to? Thirdly is efficiency. Last time we saw examples where we count up the number of steps it takes to do something, and we can quantitatively compare two different applications and how efficient they are. Does it take 10 clicks of the mouse when we only need 5? Enjoyability is a subjective perception of the end user, and included in this definition was also safety. So a lot of the methods kind of brought into healthcare came from the field of usability engineering, which was attempts to develop more scientific approaches to designing and testing usable systems. Now, some of you have also heard the term that's come up a lot these days is UX, or user experience. It's a similar concept, but I see it as something a bit broader. For good user experience, we want the system to be usable, of course, but useful as well. So usability, usefulness, desirable. If we want a product to be used, it should be desired by the end user. Findable. Users should be able to find where the application is. It should be accessible. Information in the system should be credible and perceived as valuable by the end user. So this is just a metaphor of the difference user experience versus usability. Using a road trip metaphor, is that the user experience would be the experience of the whole trip, including your anticipation of it, everything that went on during the trip, and then your evaluation of it at the end of the trip. Whereas usability would be more about how to get from here to there and get on the road. From a formal definition, this is from the International Standards Organization, usability is defined as the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals with very similar to the first definition, effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in the specified context of use. And user experience contains usability, but it would be a person's whole set of perceptions, experiences, and responses that result from using a product or anticipated use of it. So it's a bit of a broader concept. Currently, a lot of human factors labs are labeled as UX or usability labs, and they do essentially the same type of studies that the usability labs have been doing. One other comment about human factors is very important as a part of user-centered design. The idea that we need to bring the users into the design, focusing early on understanding what their information needs are when designing the system, continually evaluating the design with end users during the design process, and testing with end users. This testing should be done throughout the whole system development lifecycle at key points. And the overall map for the methods, last week we went into detail on usability inspection. This was the method where the analyst or inspector steps through the system methodically. So this, the first category, usability inspection, isn't observing users. Today we'll talk about the part where we're observing representative users doing representative tasks, and using a method called Think Aloud and digital video recordings. If we move the testing to a more realistic setting, or the hospital, for example, then we tended to call this clinical simulations. So the question is, when can usability studies take place? This diagram many of you are familiar with is a system development life cycle that goes from planning a system to analysis, design, implementation, and use of the system in the support phase. So when I started working in this area, I tended to work with projects at the end of the life cycle, but found over time that the usability testing was even more useful the earlier you could try it out. So if you can try it out before the system is deployed, you can find a lot of problems earlier on. It's more cost effective and more efficient. So we can do some of this testing I'll talk about today. Even after you've purchased a commercial system, we've done many studies. But if you're also working in the development cycle, we can work with developers at pretty well any phase to try out different designs or of the system. So I think last time what I was suggesting you try was simply, then Simon mentioned he did that with a phone application, observing the simplest usability testing is observing and video recording representative users interacting with the system. So for example, recording physicians or patients interacting with the system, and doing a task. As I mentioned, we always specify the task, like getting advice from the system or searching for information. So in that picture is just myself using a system, and if I had the audio on, you could hear myself thinking aloud while I use the system. All the screens are recorded directly on the hard drive as a digital movie file. And the value of doing this is a lot, because today I'm going to talk about how to formally analyze and code the data from the video. But even if you don't do that and you're in a design cycle, simply having video recordings of end users is invaluable. You can take that back to the designers and show them where users are having problems or where the interface needs to be modified. So as I say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a video of actual users interacting is extremely valuable. Yep. We mentioned last time that the usability testing can be done remotely and very inexpensively. This is similar to kind of what Simon mentioned. If I'm recording end users using an electronic health record remotely, for example, I send them a Zoom meeting link. They join in the meeting remotely, could be in another city. In one project, the doctors were in Ottawa, and they interact with the system. And if they share their screen in Zoom, I can record what they're doing, which will give you the same data. That's a video of what they're clicking on the screen and what they're saying. So there's many ways to collect this base data. And being on a Zoom meeting, I can give them instructions remotely. So remote usability testing, I think when COVID came along, became really useful because we couldn't go to hospitals and do those studies, but we could do them remotely. And again, the result is a digital video movie file. Here's a slide on if we were doing mobile usability testing. There are many ways to do this. One of the methods was a user would use like an iPhone, and there would be a digital, a document camera pointed at it, but that's not very good because you might move your hand. What Simon was doing was having the user go into a Zoom, a very good way to do it, a Zoom meeting, and then have that screen of the user's mobile on the desktop, which you can record. There are other methods. I've done ones where we recorded to the phone itself or had the phone screen mirrored to another computer using Apple. There's other methods as well. You can actually do screen recording or recording of someone in a health environment using smart glasses. We recently purchased Ray-Bans that have a small camera on them. And again, what you end up with is the same type of information, a video of what's going on. So that's the data part. And coming into what I want to talk about is some examples, and I'll start off with some examples, actually from some of the earliest ones I did, with systems like electronic health records, and then move into an example with pretty sophisticated clinical decision support. Wouldn't call it AI, it was rule-based, and then end with an example that was from evaluation of an AI application that we worked on a couple of years back. So one of the ways of analyzing the data that you get from the video is to develop coding categories. So we'll collect the data, and this fits with what I term low-cost rapid usability testing. As I said, we don't need an expensive lab. You can collect the data in the hospital. I've done studies in everything from operating rooms after hours to clinical labs and the actual hospital wards. So one of the topics that comes up is people will say, well, usability requirements are satisfied by conformance testing by vendors at some location, usually in the US. And this is definitely not true, because we can purchase a system from another country and try them in our hospitals, and there'll be a large number of usability problems that can be fixed through customization. So our argument has been that usability testing also needs to be done locally at every every institute deploying systems that are complex. We can use the method to predict errors and rectify them. And by using this low-cost method that's unobtrusive, the recording equipment can be taken into real settings, and after we have tested a prototype, we can continue recording to see whether the system is both usable and safe. This was a model we came up with, a 3-level model for how to conduct these types of studies. Often, when there is a need for a usability study, it's because people are having problems with the system and the users. So usually, we write the spot at the bottom where we look at a simple study of a single user interacting individually with the system at the bottom. And that's on the right-hand side where I've located usability testing. We can optimize the system at that level and then say, but now we want to test it in a real clinical environment, which is what I've labeled level 2 distributed individual cognition is level 1, distributed cognition, which I'll talk about, is level 2. And then we can optimize at level 2, but we still need to see whether the system works well at the organizational level. But one way of dealing with this is starting it's like deducing where problems are, ruling out or finding out what problems there are at the individual level before moving up. It gets more complex. And on the right-hand side of this slide, I've located different methods that I use. But usually we start off simple and with the human factors and try out someone using the system individually. So as an example, I always like to use the very first one that I ever did many years ago, where we experimented with video recording doctors and medical students using the decision support system. We asked them to think aloud and recorded what they said, and also did our first screen recording of this. So won't get into this, but we developed, this was a more recent one that was based on that from over 20 years ago. We've added many new categories. Coding scheme for analyzing usability. You'll see how this works in a minute, but let's just look at the coding scheme for usability codes. And at the bottom, there's a box on the third column, level 1, basic human-computer interaction. And included in that are codes for characterizing interactions in terms of speed, font issues, layout issues. At the bottom of the very bottom on the right-hand side is navigation problems, graphics problems, consistency problems. So we have a framework for viewing video recordings of user interactions. We can determine how many navigation problems there are in a certain module and actually quantify that. The other piece, background to all this work is I've often used something called think aloud studies, a protocol analysis. This borrows from work in cognitive psychology that goes back a ways. Before it was used in computers, it was used to study human problem solving in areas like chess, medicine, and physics, where we ask the person to verbalize their thoughts while they're solving a problem. What I wanted to do many years back was then apply that method for analyzing people using a computer system. So we asked them to verbalize or think about whatever the thinking tell us. So they might say, well, I'm opening up an application, but I can't find the navigation bar. And that would be recorded as a think aloud. And this turned out to be very useful in the field of human-computer interaction if you do it and we record both the screams and the audio. If you only record the screams, you don't know what they're thinking. If you just do a digital audio recorder of what they're saying, you don't know what they're referring to. So if you combine the two in that type of data I talked about at the beginning of this lecture, you get a lot of incredible information. So this was from the very first study we ever did. It was what I've included here is a log file. A log file is after they've used the system, I can play the video back and have it transcribe what they were saying, and then I watch the video and we can put in timestamps for what they're actually doing on the computer screen. So this becomes kind of a unit of data. And from that very first study, it was a system that was deployed to doctors and medical students to teach them about heart disease, and it had clinical guideline recommendations in it. So in this log file, if we connected this file to the actual video, you would see at 1 minute and 3 seconds, the system provides an introduction, and on the video, you see the user already looks a bit nervous and says, I have to loosen my tie. You can record behavioral things like shifting in the seat. At 2 minutes and 27 seconds, we can be precise when watching the video. The user goes into the guidelines and recommendations screen. At that point, the user verbalizes that the information is old and I don't think it's been updated. So we're able to get information. In this case, all the guidelines in the system had been updated several years before, but the developers of the system had the old guidelines. So you can see the users can tell you something very quickly about usefulness, that it's old information. Then we can watch on the video as they click on different buttons on the guidelines screen. Go to the help screen. And then on the video, this corresponds to the actual video, this transcript. After about 3 minutes, the user looks back on the video and says, how do I fast forward? So if you remember from the coding scheme we developed, that would be a simple example of a navigation problem. So by identifying it using the coding scheme, we can come up with the number of times different users have navigation problems and then what component of the system. Eventually, the experimenter helps him move along, and this was unexpected. At 3 minutes and 32 seconds, you see on the video the program crashes. And this was a system that was going to be sent out from a drug company, and they only wanted us to evaluate it at the end of the system development lifecycle. And we warned them, we said it's buggy. It has what we call last week usability catastrophes. They went and sent it out, and it ended up having to be recalled. And from then on, I only ended up working with organizations that would allow you to provide feedback that could be acted on earlier in the design cycle. So when it's starting up, the user again is saying that the information was old, and they will probably turn it off at that point. So 3 out of the 4 doctors said exactly the same thing about it. You can see whether someone understands labels on the sidebar, or they're looking to find something called an options menu, and says, the user says, the quotes are what the user says, I don't know which one of these is the option menu. It doesn't come with instructions. So actually, it didn't come with any online help. At the very end, he says, I have to get out the owner's manual facetiously. So we can see this user is having specific issues in using the application, and we were able to find exactly where the problems are, summarize them, and present them back to the designers. So this was the very first experiment we did with this. Then we moved on to looking at, can we use the method to evaluate the impact of systems on things like clinical reasoning, individual decision-making, and group decision-making. And later on, Elizabeth will talk about how this expanded into looking at technology-induced errors. So how can we look at cognitive aspects integrated with usability? So in that three-layer model, this would correspond to the middle layer in orange. Looking at users, the one we just looked at would be level 1, the user interacting with the system in isolation. This would be level 2, the user interacting with the system and their environment to carry out a work task. So we looked at the implementation of electronic medical records in the clinic, a diabetes clinic at the McGill Hospital, and we also observed the whole process of implementing the EMR in the practice, and did pre-interviews about what they thought the system would do to their practice, make it more efficient or less. We observed the training and video recorded the actual training, and we also did usability testing with all the members of the clinic, which included doctors, nurses, dietitians, and others. So this type of work was a move away from the study of the individual interacting with the system to looking at collaborative decision-making. So we still do recording, but now we're not recording someone thinking aloud. We'll be recording the doctor-patient interaction while using a new system. And this is where we apply the game, some other aspects from the coding schemes. This was the very first system we tried this on. It was evaluating an electronic medical record system in the 1990s, and it was designed as something called a paper scroll metaphor. You could scroll down, enter data as you're going along. So what we did to analyze its use is record the doctor using the system, interviewing the patient. Now, in this case, and I was recording in the back, in this case, it wasn't actually a real patient. It was someone playing a patient, which is something we call simulated patient, which we borrowed from medical education. So what would be recorded now in the digital movie from the computer, whatever software we were using to record, would be what the doctor was clicking on as he scrolled and used the computer, and the audio portion now would not be think aloud, but a dialogue between the physician and the patient. So we're able to relate what they're doing on the computer to what they're saying in the dialogue. And we'll see in a moment why there was a video recording as well of what's going on in the room. So we have two video recordings here. One is the recording directly onto the hard drive of the video of the movie file of what they're clicking on. And the second one was a recording of what they're doing in the room. And to do that, we simply use a camera on a tripod. So we have the physicians interview a simulated patient while using the electronic medical record system. And we also recorded training and patient interviews. So what we found was that being exposed to the system was associated with very clear changes in physician information gathering using the technology, and that subsequently affected how they reasoned and did their medical practice when they were using the system. So what we did find is over time, the physicians had to adapt and develop a style of interacting with the system that they were comfortable with. I won't get into this, but what it did show is that some of the physicians went from what we call forward reasoning, where they ask about patient data and then go to a diagnostic hypothesis, which is what more expert physicians do. And some of them kind of force them to go backwards from categories or hypotheses on the screen to collecting patient data. So there was a change in what we call the directionality of reasoning, at least during the period while they adapted to the system. So how we analyze the log file for this is we again watch the digital video and code it and timestamp it. And at this point, we're less micro-focused. We're not as focused on what they're clicking on or whatever, but more what they're doing. So you can summarize an interaction quite nicely. This one showed that for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the doctor went on the system on the video. You can see it creates a patient visit. At 2 minutes 47 seconds, they started to go into the system to enter a chief complaint, but then stopped. And then they, for a few minutes, went back to the paper and wrote on the paper. And it took them almost 9 minutes before they decided to go back into the system. And then the interesting thing was, you can see what they do. When they went in the system, they seem to follow all the categories on the screen, something we call screen rhythm. So if I go back to the this particular system, it was quite a busy user interface. And what we found was that when we watched the video recordings, the doctors initially had struggled with where to find information on the screen. Some of them quit the project at that point, whereas other ones said, okay, I understand how to use this system. And then all they did thereafter was follow the categories on the screen. So rather than asking questions the way they wanted, they became what we call screen-driven, which wasn't necessarily good or bad, but it definitely changed their pattern. So what we said, this particular user that was on the example on the slide now, had actually been an experienced user of the system for over 6 months. And when we interviewed him after, he said, what I was doing was going into the system, but the system guides me too much if I immediately go into it. And he decided to backtrack and collect information on paper before he went back into the system, so it didn't lock him in. And there was often a period where the user would have to adjust to the system, and it was very clear to see this on the video. So what kind of framework can we apply to think about this type of interaction? Well, there's a very well-known one from human-computer interaction called distributed cognition. And it's the idea that people's thinking or cognition is not locked in the person's head, but instead is distributed amongst individuals and settings and a number of agents. Agents and artifacts can be people, computer systems, could be AI systems. All these representations could be involved papers, faxes, and that what's actually how it's decided is distributed amongst all that during the different interactions, say in the clinic. And this is called a functional system and has been studied in human factors in areas like ship navigation, air traffic control. So it seemed to be a useful model for beginning to look at human-computer interaction in real settings. So just a diagram here of a doctor as an agent, a patient, and I put the computer actually as an agent because the doctor will be conversing in a sense with the computer while conversing and talking to the patient. And the two-way arrows show two-way exchange. And in this case, there's an arrow from the patient EMR, medical record system, at the bottom circle to the patient because the patient was actually allowed to see the screen. But you can develop out models like this for more complicated clinical settings. And just as an example of how this comes into play, in some evaluations, we actually recorded what the doctor physician was doing with the patient, what they were saying, the patient dialogue. At the same time, we called it the dialogue of the physician with the computer system. So in this example, there's a conversation going on about diet and eating croissants. And on the computer, at the same time, the doctor is also having a dialogue with the computer about entering medication information. So one of the things we found is that this can create a lot of cognitive load. I mean, essentially, the user of the system is carrying on two conversations and has led to work we're looking at on how we reduce cognitive load in designing such systems. So again, it's this example of now we have a more complex situation. So diagrammatically, this is classic human-computer interaction. We are moving from the individual cognition to what we call distributed cognition. So that has come into play recently in a number of studies we've been doing. We have been looking at evaluating impact of systems on virtual care. After COVID, a lot of interactions have been done using Zoom, some on telephone, simpler than that, but we're looking at studies on one set of studies where we're doing simulations where medical fellows and residents are interviewing patients on Zoom using an electronic health record on their computer as well. And again, what we're doing is using Zoom, recording it, and analyzing the interaction, coding it for things like usability problems, the impact of going virtual, and some of these approaches have also been used for procurement as well in comparing systems. So our current work, some of it is expanding the video coding schemes, so it gives us a lens for looking at the interaction, where we create like a dictionary of codes about things like problems, like a navigation problem. In the table, it says it's coded when the review of the video data indicates the user has problems moving through the system. And then in this coding dictionary, we have an example. For example, a physician can't backtrack to a screen where the allergy information is because it can't find it. That's a navigational issue. It can be quite dangerous too. Consistency, another row in that table. Coded when the view of the data indicates the user has problems due to lack of consistency. And there are many examples of studies we've done. In one study, I remember the year, the month, day, and time was reversed in two parts of the system, making it inconsistent, etc. So we create categories like this, and we've expanded and created ones for doing analyzing interactions for safety, impact systems on decision-making and workflow. And the other interesting thing about this is some of this coding can be automated. Now Elizabeth Borycki and others have been working on using in vivo, which is a qualitative coding tool that you begin coding, human coding it, and then letting it run to complete the coding once it's learned your way of coding. Although that method doesn't really include looking at the video as of yet. So we are working on trying to automate some of this process. So that's just a background on some of the ways we've done analysis. I want to talk about a couple of examples, moving it a little bit to some AI examples that we've worked on. But moving back to AI topic about human factors challenges with AI. I had done a book chapter about a year ago, having worked in AI several decades ago and coming back to looking at it today. There were issues that existed then that exist today. Now the technology has fundamentally changed quite a lot, become much more powerful, but some of the interesting point was the issues that we had then still exist today, but in different forms. So one, and we'll see how human factors can come into play in analyzing this. Issues of trust and legal liability. From the human factors area, there's a whole field called studying failure modes, where we study the how systems may fail, how humans may fail, and how the interaction may fail. So we have to look at issues about why users would have trust or not trust in the system, and that very quickly gets into issues around legal liability. What if AI makes a mistake? So we want to use some of the methods we're talking about today, and we'll show you how we apply them to ensure that systems won't make mistakes, or if they make a mistake, we catch it before releasing it widely. Other thorny issues that existed then and still exist today in slightly different ways. One's called knowledge acquisition. In the old AI, we created rule-based systems, and we've had to acquire the knowledge for them to run. Currently, with deep learning systems, there's still the issue of where we get the data that the system learns from, and it's another form of the knowledge acquisition problem. The human understanding explanation capability of a system is another issue. If a system has a result or gives a diagnosis, if the physician doesn't understand how to arrive at it, it won't lead to a high level of trust. And again, we can do human factor studies where we record their interaction with the system coming up with a diagnosis, and we'll get recordings where they're saying, I don't trust how the data was analyzed. Can it show me how it came up with the conclusion? And those types of studies are added to our coding dictionary. And the whole idea of what the most effective mode of interaction of the system, human with the computer system, is, how well does the system run in the background, or if not in the background, how does the user interact with it? Another problem that's existed across all those years has been challenges of integrating AI and other advanced applications with existing software systems and work processes, organizational processes. Today I'll give an example of a project with dermatology AI where careful attention was paid to how the system will fit within the healthcare organization. And last but not least, need for common sense reasoning and world knowledge to support reasoning at a deeper level. I was recently at an AI conference where one of the founders of deep learning, and one of the three people, was kind of arguing that the method is not working well for types of reasoning for things like planning, and they're working on it. Still work in progress. So what's, again, when I got to this, revisited AI, for designing and evaluating AI, why not use a usability lens? As we saw, the usability lens allows us to look at dimensions of interaction with the system, regardless of what type of system they are, regarding learnability, effectiveness, efficiency, satisfaction, and safety. And all of the dimensions are essential for AI success. So I've mentioned some studies, early ones, about just to give you an idea of what our data looks like. The usability testing can be simply defined as observing representative users doing representative tasks. And when we move the setting to real or realistic, same methodology, we record people doing tasks, but they're more in the real life setting. So we call that clinical simulation. And on the bottom right was from a series of studies we've been helping a hospital in Japan to optimize a medication administration system being used with barcoding. So we can look at the type of testing and say we can look at it from the lab on the left-hand side, doing simple studies or recording, doing clinical simulations in the middle. That's a lab in Denmark where they took some of the methods to evaluate electronic medical records during a regional procurement process. And if we're recording in the real setting, it's called naturalistic testing. And I would argue that there's been far less work done on the AI on the naturalistic testing side. It's been kind of left open. There's been laboratory studies or studies of whether a system that diagnoses skin cancer is accurate or not given an image. Far less work done on the right-hand side. And again, that corresponds to the upside down triangle, the three levels that I've already discussed. So I'll give an example of how this can be used practically. And the first example is for what I would say is current state-of-the-art decision support. So not specifically AI, although it runs off of the principles of rules, clinical rules that run in the background. This was a project we did in Mount Sinai Hospital in New York in 2012, and we were using the methodology to optimize the integration of clinical decision support into an electronic medical record, so that the support would be automatically triggered when the system detected likelihood of a different condition, and to interact with the user. And the objective of our work was to ensure that the system led to more efficiency and didn't impede workflow, and also led to better clinical outcomes. So with this type of decision support, there were a number of components. There was an alert component that popped up that would alert the doctor that the patient might have pneumonia, given what's in the system. There was a risk calculator that would allow for calculation of particular risk of the condition. And then if it looked like, for example, they had pneumonia, it would go to something called a smart set, which had medications that were recommended for the physician to prescribe. So these were the components. This isn't a screenshot. They would pop up on top of the electronic record. The relevant which record it was a commercial record. But on the top left, what would happen is the system detected, like in this case, it was a probability of a strep infection. It would pop up on top of the screen with a yellow bar. If the physician clicked accept, then on the bottom left, a risk calculator came up based on the rules for clinical guidelines with strep, where the physician entered yes, no about the conditions for strep throat, like recent cough exposed to strep. If they go at the high probability, it then says, if you accept this as a diagnosis, it moves it over to the bottom right-hand side where they have an order set already filled out for you to the doctor's enter. So as you can see, this might make things a lot easier. On the other hand, as we found out, unless it was integrated properly into the electronic record, it could have problems. So the way we did the study was following the 3 levels that I talked about, all in one study, so it's possible to look at multi-layers in evaluating a system. Level 1 was doing a laboratory study of users thinking aloud. We had 8 of them. I went to their office and recorded them in their office. Thinking aloud while using the system to go through a particular script that forced them through a pathway. So we ended up with visual recordings of the screens and what they said. An interesting point was we also had the developers of the system in the room watching the users. The reason they did that is because the developers said we want to have some very quick results. It's great you're going to be doing a video analysis, but we want something to take back at the end of the day. So they were in the room watching as well. And then at the end of the day, we took the recordings and also analyzed them. So there were 2 sources of data. Then after we optimized it, there were lots of things to optimize. For example, a lot of times the users didn't even click on the alert because the alert wasn't very prominent and they didn't know what the acronym on the button meant. It was BPA, means best practice advisory. So that was a low-level, level 1 usability problem. It was coded as meaning of labels. We fixed it. And then in level 2, we then had the doctors interacting with a kind of a rigged up digital patient. So we could look at how and when the guidelines were actually triggered in a real or realistic dialogue. And then in level 3, we actually had some testing in the live doctor's office. So our pathway for doing this was that we worked with a prototype implementation of integration. We did the level 1 usability testing, fixed the obvious simple things, and then the level 2, where we looked at the interaction, when the guidelines would be automatically triggered, was it appropriate or not, and then we made fixes to that. And then the system at the bottom right went to a large clinical controlled trial, and lo and behold, they found that the system was accurate, but also highly acceptable to the physician users in the hospital. So we attributed that to the process of optimizing the application before putting it out. And often in many implementations, they don't do this kind of optimization. And in the video coding, we again had, these were lots of examples of quotes from analyzing the video, and we could pinpoint exactly on the video what part of the screen they had a problem. A usability code, one of the users said it's becoming a lot of clicking and leaving. If you want to do things quickly, this is a problem, especially if you have a lot of patients waiting. We had another code visibility problem that came up. When we asked them why they didn't click on the alert button that would start the whole process, some of them said that they didn't notice the button. One said, I just see BPA here. Normally, I probably wouldn't see it since I don't usually look on it was a top left corner. But if it had been more prominent, if it had just popped up. An interesting one was about workflow. So many of our studies now have focused on how to introduce a system without ruining or interrupting clinical workflow, or at least being perceived as interfering. So early on, when we implemented this solution, one of the users said, I think it depends when we start using the tool. If you start using it from the beginning because you can get distracted and forget to go through other things, I think these other sets should come when we ask for them, not from the walk-in diagnosis. And I remember that video was at the point where very low information had been input into the system, no X-ray results, and the system already pushed the user to ordering for pneumonia. And so again, this was sort of a modern version of that thing we found many years ago called screen-driven behavior. And I won't go into in the bottom right corner, we took apart the different components of the clinical decision support to see what they like or didn't like. On the bottom right graph, there's bars with black and white and the vertical bars. And for every component of the system, the alert, the calculator, the smart set, we indicated how many were negative comments. This is like negative comments and how many were positive in the white part of the bar. So you can see for the alert column, most people didn't like it. Whereas for the calculator, most people actually like having a risk calculator, and some of them even told us you can get rid of the rest of the system, just give us the risk calculators because they're based on these up-to-date rules. And smart sets, most people didn't like those other sets coming up. So we're able to come up with information about specific components of a rather complex decision support tool. And in the second phase where we recorded the interactions, we also did an analysis about what point the rules were triggered, leading to pop-ups. So we could look at the guideline trigger points, and they were adjusted before final optimization of the system. So that gives you an idea of what we were doing with systems like electronic medical records. I just want to conclude my part with a project that we did that ended about a year ago called Dermatology Point of Care. It was an example of working with an AI application in dermatology, part of the supercluster project we were involved with, digital supercluster. So again, it's another type of technology, but we can use similar methods. So the project was about integrating an AI dermatology application into cancer care workflow. And what we wanted to do was effectively integrate the system. And the technology was there. The technology on evaluations of its accuracy, which are often done in isolation, was greater than 90% accuracy. And there were other studies I've seen in New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet where they reviewed the accuracy of a lot of these systems based on deep learning, and they're often very accurate. But accuracy isn't everything if you want something to get implemented. So our human factors perspective was, how can this technology be integrated into practice of primary care physicians, as it turns out, across an entire health authority? So why would we do this project? Well, it was easy to write up in the proposal that there's often long wait lists for specialists, and patients can wait months to see a dermatologist. And in that period, if you have a malignancy, you can move from having something simply removed to a stage 3 or 4 cancer that would require an expensive surgery or palliative care, and it's too late. Every day can lead to progression of cancer with skin cancer and other cancers. So what was the technical solution? I won't go into a lot of detail. It was simply that the company that we work with had developed an application that would be used in the doctor's general practitioner's office. If the general practitioner, the family doctor, wasn't sure, they could use the device on the phone, on the iPhone, and there was a device for making consistent pictures, and that photograph would be uploaded and compared in the cloud to a whole set of labeled images of cancerous lesions. And the algorithm would compare the image to those label sets and then present to the clinician what was the closest match with the percent risk of it being malignant, the probability. So it brought the images down, and it didn't tell them that it was malignant, didn't replace the diagnosis, but it gave them a comparator. And then at that point, if the GP wanted to, he just hit the button, and then that whole package would be sent to the dermatologist's office electronically. So, yeah, it was actually used by found out by Providence Health, because we presented at an AI conference and they had talked about an application that I go, yes, that's the one we worked on, but didn't know if it had been used. So they had implemented it. The method we studied it was again using Zoom sessions with individuals, specialists, GPs, and patients, because the patients were aware it was being used in the office because they were taking pictures there. Sessions were recorded as they interacted with the application and answered questions. So again, the data was audio and video files. So our findings were the following. This is right from what we wrote up. The solution was considered usable and useful. Patient liked the solution because the patients felt it was reassuring, having confidence that the device and the application was being used. However, there was need, as with a lot of what I've said before, integration of the AI with electronic medical records. At the initial part of the project, we were to be integrating it with a number of major vendor products, and it didn't happen by the end of it. So they still have the integration problem. Training was perceived to be useful, but the two ones in bold is, one, the speed for getting a diagnosis and treatment was expedited. It decreased the wait time substantially for diagnostic assessment of skin cancer by the expert dermatologist. And another interesting finding was the approach eliminated unnecessary stress associated with waiting for a diagnosis. So not only did it shorten the wait time, but the stress involved in the patient waiting rather than waiting 6 months. And we did the stats on the way this was integrated, what did it save in time? And the upper workflow diagram is the way it was done before we did the project, that the primary care exam might refer the patient to a specialist and wait and wait and wait, to wait up to 6 months to get to the dermatologist. And then the dermatologist might say, oh, no, you need to get a biopsy right away. So we focused on the front end of the workflow, although we could target different areas. But for this project, we only focused on the front part. And what we found was after implementation was quite astounding, that the 84% of the referrals from the primary care at the bottom row there went to the dermatologist in a week, actually 5 days or less. So in some cases, it looked like the dermatologist responded on the graph that said 0 time, but it was within the same day. So having this tool, a bit hard to say, was it the AI, was it the teledermatology, or the combination, but it greatly reduced the wait times from the GP to the specialist from the average of 192 days to about 5 days or less for most cases. And some referrals were occurred within the day because it was a lot simpler. So that was an implementation success of AI, but it required careful consideration of how to fit the AI into the workflow. Intent not to replace diagnosis, but to, in a sense, flag what might be a problem to look at. Yeah, and the biggest challenge often seems how we get integration from all the different parties, including the vendor who made the product, the health authorities, and everyone else, cancer care. So current areas that could be worked on, if the suspected cancer, alerting could be done automatically, inserting potential melanoma into a patient problem list, for example. Again, using that kind of clinical decision support approach I talked about from the study in New York, and working on developing complete pathways from identification, flagging, biopsy, and to the cancer agency. And as I mentioned, this application ended up being used. We were quite happy with it. So I'll just briefly mention a third example where AI could be used as smart home devices. For smart home, Elizabeth has some pictures of a smart home, but we started off with a smart home is a lab, a simulation lab down the hall, where we started off taking a storage room and moving it into a state-of-the-art simulated smart home. And what are some possible uses of AI technology that we're interested in exploring? Well, if you have a smart home, it'd be for assisted living, like developing devices elderly could use, or cancer patients going home, maybe living alone. We can look at speech recognition, natural language processing for commands, context-sensitive help around the home, automated analysis of interaction with devices, like plumbing and sweep and water faucets. Doesn't even have to be complex AI, because you can trigger alerts if someone went home, your elderly parent, and never used the water faucet, then that would trigger an alert that could go to a guardian or a hospital far away, and someone could check in. We can also do more advanced analysis, data science methods on analyzing, for example, sleep patterns and eating patterns. And automated alerting about dangerous situations, like was the stove not turned off. So currently we're looking at where and when the best to integrate and trigger AI support and analytics. So in general, when and how we integrate AI into health, well, it must be inserted for a task that AI has been proven to be good at doing. It has to be useful, saving time somewhere. If it, I think as Elizabeth said last time, if it does the same as what was done before and doesn't save time or effort, probably won't be adopted. Could increase accuracy or have better outcomes. It's very difficult to show that. We're looking at ways of doing that, but it's difficult in the evaluation to prove it. Must integrate into workflow if it's ever going to be used. Must be shown to be safe, which the second half of the presentation will consider. And as I talked about earlier today, considering how it affects work practices, reasoning, and decision-making. So we proposed a multi-phase approach to evaluating AI, just as we have used for evaluating other technologies, where we start off in the early phase of laboratory testing, using some of the methods that we covered in the first presentation on usability inspection, some simple usability testing, recording users. We can move to clinical simulations in the middle, and then doing some in situ or near live or live testing. I've done this with the hospital in New York, where on the phase 3, we released the system, not the big bang release, but pretty incremental one. 1 or 2 wards saw how it went, kept the recording going, and then they released it across the whole Hughes hospital system. And that was a very successful implementation because we phased it very carefully. We maybe consider human-computer interaction modes, whether the system that you consult it, critique it, ask it a question like ChatGPT. Does it augment human perception? Last time we talked about radiology applications that might flag on an image possible cancer. Extending physical access, like robotic surgery, is a really good application. The system is not autonomous, but works with the surgeon to do things you couldn't otherwise do. We can ask, does the system run in the background? Is it alerting, reminding? Like the example I gave earlier today is basically a direct extension of rule-based AI. And machine learning and knowledge discovery, how are results interpreted or validated, are explanations understandable. We can also look at this on the continuum from consulting and human decision support on the left-hand side to something that's more autonomous and independent. So as I said, the surgery has been transformed by robotic surgery using a system called the Da Vinci robot, but it's not an autonomous robot at all. It's a hand controlled by physician, but it takes into account and optimizes the surgery process. It can be done remotely, actually. And I put intelligent alerts and reminders somewhere in the middle. They may run in the background until a problem occurs. So concluding from a human factors perspective, it appears also from looking at the literature which we're currently working on, that AI will be adopted if it's shown to work properly and is accurate. FDA approval is good, and ironically, a lot of applications in AI have not yet been FDA approved, and I'm not quite sure they know how to evaluate them. I've been told that by people working there. But that even FDA approval is not enough to assure adoption. Have to solve a problem, save time, money, or increase efficiency. It may also do something that may otherwise not be possible, like some of the robotic surgery, and is usable and fits into complex workflow activities, and we can prove that, I believe, using human factors approaches. So my conclusion on this part is increased consideration of human factors is essential in the age of AI in healthcare, as it was before and will remain to be. And success of AI systems will depend on the extent to which technologies are designed to be both useful and usable and fit within human work activities. So therefore, we're arguing for a human factors lens on AI. With that, that's what I have for this part. We could do questions later, but can we pause for about 5 minutes, and then we'll switch slide backs, and then Elizabeth will move into a section on ensuring safety. So if we could pause for about, come back at about 1:15 PST, and then we'll continue on, and then we can have a discussion at the end. Sound good?
Part of our presentation this afternoon. So today I am going to add on to Andre's presentation, and we're going to talk about AI safety in terms of human and healthcare organizational considerations. So what are some of the issues that are out there? So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to go over today. I very much take safety from a learning health systems approach, which fits really nicely with the quality improvement literature and some of the research and work that I've been doing here at the School of Health Information Science for the last 20 years. I'm going to also define health technology and AI safety, provide some examples of safety issues, describe some of the current issues and considerations surrounding AI safety in healthcare, and the methods for evaluating and testing AI safety. So what is a learning health system? I think it's really important to define what we mean by that, because it's oftentimes used as a buzzword. But a learning health system is a system that employs modern evidence-based quality mechanisms to create safe, high-quality systems of digital healthcare. Learning health systems involve the use of healthcare practices in which progress in science, health informatics, and care culture align to generate new knowledge as an outgoing natural byproduct of the care experience, and is used seamlessly to refine and deliver best practices for continuous improvement in healthcare. And that's a definition that's been put forward by the Agency for Healthcare Quality. And I think what's really neat about it is that there is a formal incorporation of health informatics in that definition. So it goes to show how far health informatics has come in the last few years in terms of advancing the science and being recognized for its contributions. So in a learning healthcare system, especially a digital one, we have to understand that there are digital structures that are present in every healthcare system. And those structures are implemented in organizations, and that leads to an organizational configuration. And that actually leads to identifying in ways in which healthcare professionals actually use the technologies in the process of care. Then what happens is the organization's activities or processes change over time in response to the technology, because the technology not only changes, for example, communication patterns, but it also influences the types of decisions that are made, where they're made, and how they are made. So we have the technology actually influencing those organizational processes, and that in turn influences organizational outcomes. And organizations look at their technologies and implement new technologies and reconfigure other technologies in order to improve the digital structure. And this process is a continuous process, and it's an organizational learning process that takes place. So it's really important to understand that every time we implement a new technology, we configure a technology, we update it, we're actually making changes to the organization that is using that technology, and we're affecting the process of care for health professionals as well as for patients who use those technologies. So we know that safety is an important issue, and we know that safety evolves over time in a learning health system. So we know that if you implement something new, that there may be more issues with safety at the beginning of its implementation than there is over time. And we can see this quite frequently when we have a new technology that's implemented in a healthcare system, such as an AI system, or perhaps a new decision support system, where the technology is implemented, it does change processes. And while the health professionals are learning how to use that technology over usually a 3-month period, then there may be opportunities for new events to occur. And we need to understand how those events occur in order to be able to make that technology safer over time. And that involves a great deal of communication between health professionals, members of the organization that are implementing the technology, and refining the technology over time. So I like to look at technology from the perspective that we have. It lives on a continuum of safety. So we don't necessarily have unsafe systems, nor do we have safe systems. But we're constantly moving our technologies forward so they become safer and safer over time. And this is characteristics of the quality improvement learning health system process, because this happens with even technology, I should say, even processes that do not involve technology, or that borrow on a technology to have them completed. So for example, providing nursing care, there are some parts of that process that are supported by technology, and other parts the nurse does without using specific technologies such as the electronic health record. But we all know that errors can occur at any point in time. So we need to understand where they occur and how we can prevent them from occurring again. So we have technologies that we have currently deployed in our healthcare systems, and we've also introduced AI systems in order to improve or enhance the quality of care. And that's an important watershed moment for healthcare in general, being that we have recognized that we have digital health ecosystems, such as electronic medical record ecosystems and electronic health record systems ecosystems that are present throughout the healthcare system, and that we are adding new technologies that may actually influence what is recorded, how that work is done, and may interface with these systems. So it's really, really important to understand what they do and how they do it, and then also to understand the possible areas where there may be safety issues and to address them. So this type of research isn't news. I'll be honest with you, it's been around since about 2005, but we've had instances in the past 20 years where we've identified differing types of errors. And one of the things that's really interesting about technology is that what it can do is, if designed properly and implemented properly, we have a reduction of errors that take place. But there may be also cases where there are new types of errors that are introduced, because individuals may not be comfortable with using the technology. They might not understand its impacts on workflow or patient care. And it's important to be able to look at that technology in terms of what it provides in terms of safety gains, as well as what it may introduce in terms of safety issues. And this is really important because if we address those safety issues, those safety gains continue to move forward in terms of the use of the technology. So it's important from the perspective that we have to create a learning health systems approach in order to continually move that button towards safer and safer healthcare systems of care. So what are safety issues in technology? Well, we call them technology-induced errors at the School of Health Information Science, and this is a term that's quite commonly used now in the health informatics literature. And these types of errors arise from the design and development of the technology itself, its implementation and customization, and the interactions between the operation of the technology and the new work processes that arise from a technology's use, its maintenance, and also the interfacing of two or more technologies to provide some form of healthcare services or healthcare. And there are a number of different types of examples, and many of these examples, which have been documented in the literature, also appear when using different types of AI technology to support those processes. So, for example, you might have incomplete information located in an electronic health record, and that might lead a health professional to actually give the wrong medication. You can also have an AI system that is trained on incomplete information, patient information, and that might also provide a suggested approach that may actually lead to a particular issue with a patient. So a lot of these types of errors are very much similar to the ones that were present before different types of AI systems started to be implemented. So it only goes to show that you need to consider a comprehensive, integrated approach from an organizational perspective that partners with your clinicians and your patients to be able to understand what types of errors are occurring, and then to be able to investigate and find out how we can prevent those errors from occurring in the future. And so one of the things that we've done here at the School of Health Information Science in our labs is that we've actually developed a number of different types of methodologies that can be used to understand what types of errors occur, as well as be able to rectify those types of errors. And here are some examples of just a few of the different types of methods that we have. I'm not going to go into huge details, but they actually are organizationally focused. And many organizations have implemented some of these types of methods. So, for example, the integration of usability and safety testing at the same time to identify user interface features and functions that might lead to errors. The integration of checklists in order to be able to understand what kinds of interface features and functions could lead to an error during a procurement process. And also, for example, using different types of implementation approaches that could be used to prune off errors before a system is fully implemented. So there's a lot of different ways to actually look at and create an integrated strategy from an organizational perspective that continually captures potential issues or actual issues and allows you to identify the root causes of those problems and address them. So we know that health technology and AI safety is not necessarily so unique or different from other new technologies that were implemented in healthcare in the past. And we need to build on existing methods and develop new methods to identify actual or potential safety issues involving AI. And this is actually going to be more of an issue over time because we know as AI systems proliferate and they're integrated into our existing digital ecosystems, such as electronic health records or medical devices, or other types of systems such as patient portals, that these technologies will also need to be understood in terms of their impacts and what kinds of things need to be addressed to prevent any errors in the future or to rectify errors that may be occurring. So let's take a look at that. So where does an error come from? We know that in every organization, there are multiple layers of protective systems that are in place and that prevent an error from occurring at the patient level. And what's interesting about it is oftentimes these systems, although they are integrated, they in some cases do not cover everything at every different layer. And what you might have is when you introduce a new technology that the systems that are in place don't effectively capture all the different things that the new technology does that might lead to an error. So it behooves us as health informatics professionals to look at ways that we can test the system to effectively identify where those errors might occur, and also to understand how an organization or organizations function together and how they have these created layers, safety layers, and how those safety layers may have failed in a particular case, leading to an error that occurs in the clinical setting. And so what does that mean? We have to be aware of the fact that there are varying different places where a safety issue could be introduced. So for example, if you have an electronic health record system or an AI system that draws on information that's based on policy and the policy changes, then you have to make sure that your system updates for the new policy that is being put out there, that has changed. Otherwise, you're having the system implement a policy using technology that may be different from what is an expectation at, let's say, a government level, because that policy came from government. You have to consider the fact that a lot of ATA technologies are, as well as other types of digital technologies, are based on work that's done in a particular environment or model environment or healthcare system. And as a result, it's really important to understand the nuances of that original healthcare system or environment on which that technology was designed and developed, because that's really important, because there may be differences between that setting and the setting that you are implementing your technology. As well, differing types of vendor organizations have differing approaches to design and development and even implementation. And there may be potential issues that can arise from the variability between the different approaches that are taken, as we learn more and more about what types of things happen when a vendor develops a system for a particular setting, such as a physician office. We also have to consider the fact that the local adopting organization may be very different from that model organization. And we have to look at the differences and understand that we may have to make modifications to the technology in order for it to adequately fit the current environment that that organization is in. Again, we want to make sure there's a good task technology fit so we can effectively support clinicians' work. And last but not least, we also have to do our due diligence around the individual in educating them and explaining how the technology works so they can understand its strengths, its limitations, and to use their judgment when they feel that the technology is not adequately supporting them, and to give them a place to go. So to speak to the IMIT department or to create an incident report if they've noticed that there's something that the technology has done that may be a potential issue that they have caught. And that's really, really important to be able to support our clinicians and organizations throughout this entire process. So what are some examples of AI or data quality issues that can cause error? We know that one of the big ones is non-representative data, and we know that this is really important, and it depends on what type of technology you're developing and for what particular population group. To give an illustrative example, there's some excellent research that was conducted that talked about how they had to use data from 3 different countries in order to be able to effectively train a system for detecting breast cancers. And that's a huge data set. And they also had to consider things such as the variability of the patient populations that were that contributed that data. And that was really important, again, to improve the quality and safety of that system. We know that data can have other types of biases, and these biases can take place in the process of collecting that data. Electronic health record data isn't a good example. We have biases when we create specific types of user interfaces and databases, and we may not take in all the different attributes of the patient population that is present there. And we know that health-related data may also have biases that are interjected into it. So for example, you might have racial biases that are interjected. You might have biases based on ethnicity. You also might have cultural biases. And one other thing that you might want to consider is what kind of biases are present from an organizational, even a systems perspective, because we all know that the type of organization you receive care in, as well as the system of care that is provided by healthcare system, influences the types of data that are collected. We also have to understand that there may be discrepancies between the training as well as test data. And that's something that's really important to understand, especially when we consider things such as future deployments. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that we have insufficient size of a training and test data sets. We might not be able to sufficiently handle noise or the outliers in the data. And the other piece too is looking at how users might actually influence what is in the data, and then actually in that case, influence how well the algorithm performs. So other types of issues that could be introduced from an AI design perspective that could cause error are things such as specification. So for example, there's an inadequate specification of the actual objective of the task. There might be poor specification of the task itself also. And you also might have cases where the specification itself is wrong because the person who's developing the algorithm doesn't necessarily understand the domain that it's being implemented in. And it doesn't restrict itself just to the healthcare domain. It could be the domains within healthcare that healthcare is provided in. So for example, understanding what happens in a surgical situation versus a situation where you might be providing cancer care, the algorithm may change as a result of the different types of domain areas. You also have to consider things such as designer specifications. Some designers, if they don't understand the particular domain environment, they might actually introduce or create something that actually might produce harmful or even unexpected results. So it's really important to be able to do to understand the domain environment and do adequate monitoring to make sure that the new technology we're bringing in doesn't necessarily introduce new types of errors. One of the ones that I was recently asked about, which I thought was kind of an interesting one, is this whole idea of what we have as existing technologies versus the introduction of new ones. And that's something that's really important that we as health informatics professionals need to consider. Does the new technology introduce something that is already there and is currently being used and is fully tested? And that's something that's really important. And we kind of can see that this is an important thing to consider. If you have something that's tried and true, and the clinicians are familiar with it, they understand what it means conceptually, how it fits into their workflow, and what impacts it has, including its limitations. Is it worthwhile to replace that with something that is similar, but we don't know what the effects might be because it hasn't been fully utilized over a long period of time? Other things that need to be considered are things such as the environmental impacts of on a technology's use. So again, consider, well, where is it going to be used? Is it going to be used in the emergency department? Is it going to be used in the community? Obviously, there are differing risks and differing implications in terms of how the technology may be affected in terms of its use. So the emergency department, there's an urgent nature to it. The patient situation may not be fully known. There might be still diagnostic tests taking place. Is that technology as effective in that environment as, let's say, a physician's office where there's a known disease and that there is a need to find out some additional information about, let's say, some medications that are part of a guideline? So consider that the risk and the amount of ambiguity may change by differing environments and even in terms of different types of patients. So that has to be considered when designing the technology. So very, very important from the perspective that we have to include the users and we have to understand what their needs are. And they also have to be made aware of the technology's strengths as well as their weaknesses. So what you don't want to do is to get into situations where even the organization itself may influence the technology's use. So to give an example, you could create a solution that would maximize the awards associated with the users gaming the system. What we don't want is the users to game the system to affect a particular type of organizational outcome. So for example, you could game a system for finding out what the cost effectiveness are of different types of treatments and then choose the one that's most cost effective. We want the clinicians to choose the solution that is the most cost effective, that is the most clinically relevant as well as cost effective, rather than just looking at cost, for example. And that's the kind of thing that's really important to consider. So different types of things also need to be considered from the perspective of testing new AI solutions. And that's actually a big issue. So there is a tendency to kind of consider AI testing as something that is only limited to the work of the developer. You need to also test the solution in real world or even clinically simulated environments. Ideally, you do a clinically simulated environment testing and then real world testing, with the clinicians being aware of what's happening and providing feedback to the people who had designed the algorithm. And that's really important, because what we see is that oftentimes technologies fail in cases such as there's a rare condition that comes up for a patient, or it may not be usable or useful or even integrate into the workflow of that particular contextual setting that the clinician is working in. It also may affect things such as the ability to perform other types of tasks that need to be considered from a clinical or patient perspective. In addition to that, one has to also consider the fact that you may be deploying something that may not perform as well as you expected, or can't adapt to environmental changes. A good illustrative example of that is we know that in a typical year, we have different types of diseases that come up. So for example, influenza, where there's peaks and valleys in terms of the experience of COVID. And so that might actually influence how a system is used. And we need to understand whether or not that system is continuing to be effective during those periods, especially when you're trying to use, let's say, an AI system to predict staffing needs for an emergency department. And we know that there are these upticks, and there's these periods of lull for certain types of diseases such as influenza. So other things that are considered important are addressing things such as security mechanisms for the systems, so that we don't have a tampering that takes place with the technology. We also need to consider some of the things around the users in terms of their ability to understand how the technology is used, its benefits, its limitations, and what to do in terms of an issue when an error occurs. And that's very important, because we have to include the organization, and that the organization existing processes that the clinician may be familiar with, and adding to those in order to be able to understand what the technology is doing. So how do we make a technology safer? There's a lot of different ways to look at it, given the fact that we're increasingly living in a digitally mature environment. It's really important to understand how the new technology that's been inserted into that digital ecosystem has an impact. So it's very important to understand how it has an impact at the individual level, and in terms of the existing digital ecosystem. So to give an illustrative example, we want to introduce a new AI system that's going to support some aspect of decision-making for a clinician. It's really important to understand what the electronic health record that's there does so far in terms of supporting the clinician's information needs, their information seeking. It's really important to understand the decision support systems that are currently integrated with that electronic health record, and how they impact that clinician in terms of their work processes, how they support their decision making, and also how they support patient care activities, as well as any other ancillary devices. So for example, you might have a blood pressure monitor, you might have IV pumps that are also part of that digital ecosystem. So now we have a very complicated environment. So let's say hypothetically it's an intensive care unit. We also have cardiac monitors. So we have all these things running together. Now we're going to add in a new tool. And so we need to understand how that particular tool first affects the individual. And then we have to look at how that tool affects the individual working with all of those other digital devices and other clinicians. And then last but not least, we need to understand, when we have all of those things working together, how does that impact the organization's functioning from a digital perspective? So again, really important to first do the testing at the individual level, then looking at the individual using the devices in the context of their use in a limited sense, and then seeing how that particular technology starts to affect the organization in terms of its benefits from a safety perspective and any potential issues that might come up, so we can address those. And that's really critical, because we know that before a system is implemented, we can make modifications to that system to improve its safety, to prepare it for the clinical setting. And these modifications before the system is deployed are less costly to the organization than after it has been implemented. Because before the system has been deployed, you haven't trained any health professionals, you haven't had to develop mitigation strategies, you haven't had to deploy additional staff from the IMIT department to make modifications if something occurs. So it's really important that a lot of this work takes place before a system's deployed. Now, knowing full well that you cannot capture every situation, because in healthcare we have common routine events, and we also have unique situations that occur. After a system's deployed, you have to also monitor it to see how well it's doing, what kinds of issues are present. But if you address a lot of these issues before the system's deployed, then you have less to address once the system is deployed. And over time, as an individual learns how to use that system in the context of their environment, and that we know that that learning period takes about 3 months before a person plateaus in terms of their interactions and behaviors with that system, we can monitor for that and understand what kinds of things we can do to address any potential issues that have arisen. Lastly, after that 3-month period has been completed, you have to make sure that you have processes that are ongoing and in place to be able to address any particular types of issues that still may occur with regards to that system. Again, as time goes on and with testing, we know that we can reduce the number of occurrences of errors, and we can also improve the quality and safety of the system even more so. And here's a good example. So this was a study that we did involving looking at the usability of a particular software. We identified there were specific features and functions that were associated with safety issues, and that could be corrected before the system is implemented. And those errors, those issues, never appear for the clinician in a real world setting. And then what you can do also is you can test that software out in clinical simulations. So for example, in a emerge department, or in a hospital room, or even in a clinically simulated surgical setting, to put the software and the new technology under the pressures that are similar to those that are present in the clinical environment. And then you can identify issues that can occur. And the beautiful part about doing these types of simulations is that you can engage the clinicians in a deep discussion around what kinds of things they were thinking and what they experienced when using the technology. And if you need to further understand the impacts, so now we've understood what the individual impacts are, what the team impacts could be, then you can actually use that data, and you can do projections and forecasts what the potential issues are if you don't address those particular safety issues, or if you address the issues before the deployment has taken place. You can see how you have essentially improved the safety of the system using computer-based simulations. Then there's also other types of tools that you can use. This is an excellent tool that was developed by one of my colleagues, Pritma Dylan Chatta. And it's a tool that was actually used by Alberta Health Services. And what they did is they actually checked for system safety prior to an implementation. It's an excellent configuration checklist. And then there's a subsequent publication that recently came out that demonstrated how it actually improved the safety of systems that were implemented. So one other thing that needs to be considered is the data science perspective. I think many of you have probably seen this. This is actually a good example of an incident report. This is one that is publicly available, but many organizations have incident reporting systems that allow you to capture data and to gather information about what actually happened in terms of errors. And AI systems are now the descriptions of how errors occur are actually being put into AI incident reporting systems. And so, for example, you could look at data, for example, from the MOD FDA data reporting system, and you can understand where errors come from and what kinds of issues they have. And we know right now that a lot of errors have differing features and functions. So, for example, we now know, because of the complexity of our digital health ecosystems, that most errors have a number of different factors that contribute to their occurrence. We also know that as a result, we have a number of different layers that are present in the organization, but yet they don't necessarily effectively capture the error before it makes its way into a real world situation. So we need to look at these things and understand how they can potentially occur. We also know that a lot of the errors are common across different types of software and different types of technologies. And this is very important, because what that means is that we can develop industry-wide solutions to particular issues that are encountered, so we can improve safety overall. So everyone can learn from looking at incident reports, analyzing them, looking at the factors that contribute to those reports, to those examples of safety issues, and then we can also develop solutions, and we have methods to do that. And so what does that mean? What it means is that we can now start doing a lot more work around creating more layered approaches towards understanding where errors come from and to prune them off over time. So we can apply a lot of these methods to the use of AI technologies. In many ways, we can understand what the technology does and how it affects care before a system actually is deployed for real world use. And so what does that mean? So in the School of Health Information Science, we're starting to work with different types of environments to be able to understand how those technologies have impacts on decision-making, reasoning, information seeking, and even how the process of care is impacted. And here's a really nice example of our hospital room, where we have a hypothetical patient. And we also have other individuals who are working in that setting. We also are looking at how AI could potentially impact how we use technologies in a typical physician's office. So in the School of Health Information Science, we also have a simulation lab, not only of a hospital room, but also of a physician's office. And in addition to this, I think Andre mentioned this a little bit earlier, we also have developed a smart home lab. And so we're able to connect the different settings and understand how they impact clinicians and patient use of technology. So here's an example of Andre doing some work with 2 students in a smart home setting. Here is another different view. So you can see you can have smart home technologies that are present, such as a smart fridge, or you might have sensors in the environment. And you also have tools such as the smart home TVs that would allow you to communicate with healthcare professionals for virtual visits. So what does that mean? That means that we have AI solutions that can be tested and looked at in our settings. And this is a great opportunity to learn from specific types of technologies and how they integrate with digital ecosystems and how that interfaces with AI and what the impacts can be before deployment in real world settings. And so key to remember is that we have a lot of different ways that we can actually look at errors and improve technology safety. Technologies, when they're deployed, have had some research that supports them in terms of what they could potentially do that could enhance the healthcare system. We also have to recognize that with every new thing that we introduce and every new process, there are also opportunities to create new types of errors. And we have methodologies that can be used to address those errors, as well as prevent them from ever occurring. And that's really important to remember and to go forward with that thought when thinking about AI and introducing it into our healthcare system. Thanks.